Sendine da jungwa chimbo shi de la jungwa la yu kap de la ane jigden chi simjen den zo ge rang rang ge le ge wang le simjen nam ge le ge wang le chungwe na chungwas da de sa chu men lung nam ka den zo yang simjen ge le ge wang ge chungwa res tanda do be ni jongom ba zu nang la jigden na cho le le ke jigden na cho ba jigden ba chi gi jigden sa chu me long nang chu gi simjen jigden de tene simjen roa ri tu la so ba de namba na so ba cha wa de tham je le le chungwa re se na de chungwa de chungwa chim bo shi de simjen gi le gi wong gi chungwa re.
Yesterday there were a few questions which I would like to answer first. The first question with regard to the elements. We said that the 4 great elements are called elements because they arise from the individual or from the karma of sentient beings since beginningless time. So why do we say that the elements, earth, water, fire, wind, and also space do arise from the karma of sentient beings? Actually, Vasubandhu in the Abhidhamma Kosha mentions that all the different worlds and the content, sentient beings, they'll all arise from the karma of sentient beings. So the appearance of all sorts of abodes of different worlds, different continents, and so on, as well as the 6 classes of beings that abide within those worlds, so the gods, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings, all of those arise and appear due to the individual karma of sentient beings. And therefore, also the 4 elements, the great elements, they also arise from that kind of karmic activity.
Tene de lele chungsna simzamba tardo kechachi kan delwa yerbes ne tiro kechachi le ku yesadu tene da simzamba tardo kaina menachi tanda ngomba je nangla jide na so lele je le de la yang sambile dang simbiles sambales na lu da nga ni gi kone che gi lega de ane simbiles na simgi kone je o tinde ndu ta le simgi kone ane ji marikpa doja khongdo ngajal la so ba tin je kone le chi gi yo wa lu ji kone yang tine sokcho la so ba le nga gi kone jun thama la so ba le o tinde le ten ne jigden de chung gi yo res ta tinde sin.
And the question was further addressing the question whether this kind of presentation that it actually comes from, that is connected to the view of the Yogacarans or Chittamatrans, when we say that karma, that the elements arise from the karma of sentient beings. Actually, no, this is a presentation that we find in the Abhidhamma Kosha. And we just need to regard the karma that is mentioned here, the actions that are mentioned here, to be the karmic activity of thoughts, and that which, or the intention, and that what has been intended, or what is intended. So we divide karmic actions into the activity of the mind, and that which has been intended by the mind and then expressed through body and speech. So the karmic actions of the mind refer to ignorance, desire, attachment, aversion, anger, and pride, and so on, the afflictive emotions. while the karmic actions that have been intended by the mind then are those of the body and the speech. The body referring to physical actions like killing someone else and so on, and the negative karmic actions of the speech would then be lying and so on. So that is meant with the karma that the elements and the worlds and beings arise from. So all the worlds arise from these different kinds of karmic actions.
Dine gyusuk shiki gyu diyang yore wesana gyusuk la gyu yore chonam tamze gyu le chung tso chewa tanda sem marik duje namshe marik doja kongro ngajal tesum la soba dendegi tenne dine tas satanji shuwa na shenre lele tenne gyu diyang lele tenne chungira gyusuk shi diyang 다 중화시 람나 교수 람나 파제 집어 냅대도 주대랑네.
So another question was with regard to the causal forms. Because we call them the causal forms, the question was what causes then the causal forms, right? Or what is the cause for the causal forms to arise? And when we talk about causal forms, then this refers to the 4 great elements, it refers to earth, water, fire, and wind, and they also arise from causes. Of course, these elements also arise from causes. All phenomena do arise from causes and conditions, as it is said. And the answer is in line with what I have just explained previously. Because of the karmic imprints, the karmic actions of beings, so ignorance, anger, or aversion, desire, pride, competitiveness, doubt, all of these different intentions, the different negative emotions, afflictive emotions that cause the arising, the appearance of the elements as well.
Dine dechela yang tiwa khagajido ngombar kabyobe sok sheba deta kande dawji resne dine sna chi yangjar chi salbo chin sungno nas dine ngombar kabyobe sok de ta tanda jende tadi kurang sing nang la do parnang gi kya sing bo ta wo peja kurang nang la dene ngombar kabyo pas ngombar kabyo sana sug shen den zo de parula lebe ge kogap taw yo pas sheba sug de ni shen la thobar je bam rekcha dan talwas shen la thobar je ba rekcha sedikala yang pen nang zo kawa dang Pumbadang o denzo simbanang shingi dendegi repar chawadang dalwas. Ta panang la inde nangwa kya singbochi nangi doa nga zo ta penang panang tongba degi kanda inde ji kya singbo doji nambar kya singwa nangwas. Ta di zo de nga zo ge megi wangbo la nangsul gi kone che gogo re ta di de panang la kya singbo chini nangwas. Tadi di mingla ne ngombar kawe besus.
Then another question was to please clarify again what the spatial form refers to. Spatial form is, as it is described here in our text, is a visible form, for example, pure, clear space free from something tangible that impedes other things. So spatial forms refer to forms that we perceive because of the absence of anything else, like space, for example. Space is that which is in between different objects, and that absence of anything tangible, anything that would would disrupt or which would be there, is also what we see. So space is the space in between other things, the space that is free from objects like pillars and vases and so on. So it's the empty space in between other things. And because we actually, or it describes the way that we're actually perceiving that empty space. It's the way that empty space, the space, clear space, appears to our eyes.
Tene dila tene migi ongbo denzo la tene nangne ta migi ongbo tang konyi de ta ji rege so ro ji ta rex na ji togre yo ba ta sugi nga zo chenyi de ji suksurungwa shadi kalo suksurungwa singinde tene togre yo ba do regbi ko ne tang chebi ko ne se ni sha kalo ta regbi ko ne se de kala 난다지 매기 옹보기 되 짜승에 되지 통용이다 와. 근데 렉비고네 수기 천년이 되는 상대요래. 짜승에 되 가동도 오지.
So the point is that this empty space in between other objects is something that appears to the eye faculty that we can recognize, and in this way it comes into contact with or can be apprehended by the eye faculty, can be met by the eye faculty. And in this sense, it's also regarded as a form, because it's what we perceive, it's what the eye consciousness somehow meets or comes into contact with, recognizes, or meets with, and then we come to see, it feels like we think that we see that space. So in that sense, it is identified as a form, specifically as one that falls into the category of color forms.
디젤라 데네 지와 카가지양 지 넘버 릭제스 차살와 따우서 넘버 릭제기 속대 콜라양 간데나 손 되네 차살와당 속되게 낭라 되네 당공 지원낭신에 제기 지원낭신게 파추 조에 대된조양 디기르베스네 레 차살와 아니 가서 파추 조와 마살라 대바 잘라된조 야 짜와 잘라신 마 샤와 어딘조제 야마 조와 구제 당교된 차상제스 다딜라 넘버 릭제스 넘버 릭제데 넘버 릭제데 데네 간데스니 샤고레 숨구도 쓰나 데네 나랑족이 요와당 굴와당 야 덱바당 마 조바당 차살와당 조와 독바 된조 아니 딜레가데 마주기 문 나로도 굴롱 삼로데 아니 굴롱 셴디게 릭바르 제바스 나 조고 땅아 대고 땅아 차우지 살고 아우텐데 갑라 디 차살레기 넘바데 나 조고 삼베 넘바데 지 잘라디야 짜고 삼베 넘바데 디류가라 레그레스 디류가라 통마레스 데 요바 데 세디치네 넘버 릭체기 술라 샤바 인스네 데네 수마레 지 장군로드 타에게 시작 공격이 되는라
이 큰롱 디 유베 갑수
굴롱데 유베 갑라 통레 레레
맞습니다.
굴롱데 유베 갑라 통레 숨기도 넘버 릭체스는 데로
쿨롱 디 통기베야나 쿨롱 디게 갑수
굴롱데기 통레 굴롱데기 통레
lesson. So a second question with regard to these two forms, spatial and perceptible forms, was then about the perceptible form. And perceptible forms are exactly as it came in one of the questions. One of the questions that you had about this was referring to whether prostrating is then similarly a perceptible form as other kinds of actions would be. So your question was whether going back and forth, sitting somewhere, and so on would also be perceptible forms. And yes, these perceptible forms here are exemplified by prostrating, but such as the act of prostrating includes that there are other things too, and that refers to all of the different actions. So whether it is that one goes back and forth, goes here and there, sits on the ground, lifts something up or puts something down, all kinds of movement are included in this perceptible form. All sorts of movement that people engage in, like whether it's to sit somewhere, lie somewhere, move or sit down, lie down, move back and forth, walking somewhere, jumping, doing prostrations, any of these kinds of movements. And how can we present those as being actual form? Actually, it is explained that before doing any of these actions, any kind of movement with our physical body, there's a motivation that comes prior. So we consider what we're doing and we're making a decision. So I will go there, I will sit down, I will lift this thing up, and I will do prostrations. We do develop the motivation and have the intention to do these actions. And while we have the motivation to do so, we're considering the action. And that's the time when the actions are actually seen. So the explanation is that it's what impinges on the mind when we have the motivation, or what impinges on the motivation of doing these actions, what is seen at that moment.
Dide dazu de düse nekap gi kaptok chene geje shesha gyores nekap didu tongwa res nekap kaptok didu kulung kapla kulung digi didu nekap didu chene geje shere dide.
So it speaks about the time when we have the motivation, what is seen when we have the motivation to do these actions. That's what this perceptible form, such as act of prostration and so on, refers to.
Dine yang jiwa kaga jure wangbo de be dangma resne ne de dangma de geja kande resne sungido de wangbo de dangma sena bena melong dangma se melong changma yona ani dinangla sugde gi rokwa chene dinangla sungye shargere melong dangma sene gala melong be changma surcha sungye shar chocho be changma jwa ani sugde rokwa chene sungye sharwa nang shingi manang chogi mikki wangbo singde da di mingla wangden na de ga sha mikki mingla wangden di wangbo di ge tenji de di gi nangla yang tene mikki wangbo sarme me don na she be dangma senegala pena melong changma nang shingi marang jogi chilo gi sugdun jo tong chocho be salbo dawji o tene suyes sumitu.
Yet another question was with regard to the sense faculties. It says in our text they are inner subtle forms based on the physical sense organs. The subtle could also be translated as clear. So I said clear forms. And for example, the eye faculty can be thought of in the same way as being clear, just as a mirror would be clear. If you have a completely clear mirror that is free of any stains, then the mirror can reflect the image that is of the person or thing that's in front of it. So the appearance can arise in a completely clear mirror. And that's the way that we have to understand the subtle or clear forms here. The eye faculty, which is described as being the of the shape or appearance of an umaka flower, of a sesame flower, like round and blue, is this clear form that is based on or based within the eye sense organ. So we have the eye ball, and inside there is a very clear form without any stains that allows the perception to happen. So that's the actual faculty, and that's why we call it clear. Maybe the translation as subtle is a little bit misleading.
네, 지와 카가데 룽 사추 메론 중화시나 룽 룽데 가서 남신의 칠로 중화시나네 룽 다가랑 제스 칠로기 룽데 안에 심바 양 딩아조 카 코바는 옥당에다 딜룽데 인조 칠로기 룽데 렌 낭로라 심양 딘데스니 꼬라잡이라 아 된저 상마 지과래 룽다 디 룽데 룽 충충도 다 칠로기 룽데 룽 첨보라디 칠로기 룽데 이제 룽마 멍보 갸침보더라 다 대당 양지 심바양 자룽기 콜라 계자 룽 된저 다 라파 된저데 인제레 타와 된저 콜라 믹스에 단다 계자 시라시 말이에요 조데 단다 칠로기 단다가조 롱데체 아니 디 롱데 있겠네 지네 안가조 메도이나 옥추 롱데추 렌네 안가조 데라 수분은 롱지 베지단다 된조다 샤나디게 사레롱도 조체와다 오데다 중화시 세가라 칠로라 유비기다 롱디 된조.
Then another question was about the wind element. And here, like, of course, the wind element or the wind per se is mentioned in different ways. But here, what we should understand as the wind element and wind in the sense as it is presented here is really the wind as we find it in the environment, the wind that blows. And that then is the same air as the one that we breathe in. And there's a cycle, right? There's the outer air, wind, and then we breathe it in and breathe it out again. And we call the outer air, the outer winds, we call them the great winds, and then what is within the body, so when we breathe in and what we breathe out again, that's the smaller winds. So this is enough as an understanding here. We do not need to go into the descriptions as with the channels and winds. That is not referred to here in the text. It's really more about the wind element as that which moves in the sense of the great winds, the air around us.
지대 제곰 저거 또 와당 카곰 받은 저러 저거 또 와게 지 겐 전에 되네 먼저 수부 녀도 차와 안에 독 된저 또 스카가 차도와 어 된저 데다 파수직 저거 또와 되게 렉네 안 남줄수 규용화 더지다 된데스 속 능라 샤기레스 디앙 지와데 컨데르 티르벨 지와데
이다오레
나손
디길렌 진짜 젤라레기요 사데 상게도
나소
이네
마오네 레베르바
당 example the devanala tata legiyo saде
나소
that's not on
나소
de tekom de sowa mareves sowa ina karatine sukla kann das direkt zu geres tevadira
나소 데수 나르당 마자와 주르와테 쪽이요레 렉직 페나 제바 콤바데게 렉 용데 카텔라 소부기 녀도도 소부기 독 카가도 차도 수 나마요와데 지마 또스 마라와지 주쪽이요레
ane tekom de suk yimbe de sowa mareve tewa tekom de sowa sige mareves kann das suk tekom de kann das suk chagere reg tobiagichet
다 그런 데 규르와 수마 저거치 도용데 갑텔라 되네 수 독된도 마마다 마다와 규르 저기 여러봐 다 된대죠.
So the next and probably last question was with regard to hunger and thirst. We said yesterday that in our discussion of contact, we said that one sort of contact is the inner contact of hunger and thirst, which leads to become physical exhaustion, becoming tired, even our complexion might change. And so when we physically, inwardly become hungry, when we have that encounter with hunger, then this induces a change in our body, or a change. And actually, this is what I mentioned to Lamala just now. I found a passage later on that will speak about this question again. So maybe we will talk about it more later. But just generally, Lamala said, now, when we become hungry, there is a change that happens in our stomach, or in our belly. And so because of that change or movement that happens, then we will experience hunger. And this is what we meet with, what we encounter. Lasso.
So tene ngazo tanda tereng dan zinda de la de kenjo de nanata kebi ne chu ane chugi tomshi tene soso yangda beripa shi odine sene joja ten yebene tangbo kebi ne chu kabla yin da kebi ne chu de nang la yang ane ne tangbo phungbo la kheba ase di nang la yin tene phungbo de la tene chenyi yang sha duma pongwas phungbe chenyi di dosa bichela da phungbo de ewa 데라 수기 풍보 초리 풍보 두시기 풍보 남바르 셰비 풍보스네 나여베네 데 당보 수기 풍보 콜라 인스텐 수기 풍보 데라양 교수 중화시당 제수 죽지스네 샤웨나네 제수 죽지 갑라인 데네 왕복 나데 슈산네 데네 되는가 ane 되는 거 되는 낭라 양 되네 당보 ane 숙디 콜라인
If we come to our text now, the text is The Gateway to Knowledge by Mibam Rinpoche, and it is outlined by 3 main topics. First come the 10 topics of learnedness, then come the 4 seals, and then comes the 4-fold correct discrimination. Out of these 3 topics, we are currently discussing the 10 topics of learnedness. And the first of the 10 is becoming learned in the aggregates, and we read the definition, or we covered the definition, which is that the aggregates are the aggregation, the heaping together of many different things. And the way that this is classified then is into the 5 aggregates of form, sensation, and so on. And we're covering the first one of those, form, right now. Form is further divided into 4 causal forms and 10 resultant forms. We covered the 4 resultant forms, which were the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, and we're currently discussing the 11 resultant forms. There we find the 5 sense sources, which we finished, and we're currently discussing the 5 sense objects. And within those, we're discussing the first one. We discuss form, visible form.
가시 슈신네 나량 가상네 말라 자위 카도기 차시 제발레 제라 연라 안에 망도 교로세 자위 카도 원보당 세르보 데네양 카도지 중과도 양 마르보당 카르보 델 콘두니 데나 양 카도지 중과도 양 마르보당 세르보 데나 양 카도지 중과도 근데 라랑 소저 자위 카도데 데 송나 양 양라 도단 카도데 망보 레베 요레스네 송네 양라 망보 요로스.
So we have already covered some parts of the discussion of visible form. And if we continue now from where we have left off yesterday, we continue on page 18, the last sentence of 1.11. Many different secondary colors come about by mixing the primary colors. So we're discussing color forms. We were speaking about the primary colors. And if we mix them up, we come to many secondary colors. So if we mix blue with yellow, there will be another color that emerges from that. If you mix red and white, we get another color. If we mix red and yellow, it gives us another color, and so on. So by mixing the primary colors, then many different kinds of colors can be created.
네. 다 제 입기 권에 셰나스 단다 되는 소데라 소데라 에와데라 양 입기 권에 계제 셰나스 입기 속라스 입속라스 드네 링보 당스 베나 탁바도 링보 라 구바도 링보 안에 양 통동스라 구바 통동 타바 통동라고 다입 통동 입 롱보 안에 입나 양 함바스니 입 줍시레스 정도 입 줍시 데네 입 둠보스나 고골 입 고골 된라 입 토와스나 강바 톡사 톰보라고 베나 리잘보 리랍 톡사 톰보라고 양 마와스디갈라 강바 마오 ri chung chung do tai na de thowa dang ma wa ni de ane tösa töcho kone shagi yesung tösa töcho sena pena tanda khangba pena khangba thoksa nga roji yena yang khoi jamla khangba thoksa chu jin jin lemna yang ko mau chagire thoksa nga wa de yang thoksa chu wa de to thowa do chagire yang thoksa nga wa de ge jamla thoksa ni wa jin lemna yang thoksa nga wa de yang to sringa do o tende sine thowa ma wa singinde ta tösa töcho res khangdar yang ane thowa se ra ri gyal bo rirap do thowa khangba thoksa mangbo do thowa ma wa se ne gal khangba thoksa chung chung do ma wa ane ri chung chung do tende chawa suk chawa rakpa se na pumba do suk chimbo ane chalewa sidigala de ngarang so ge lakpe thil lakpa nang shenge lakpa ge thil nang shenge leblep yangna de panglep sing tupsi leblep tinde doa o tinde panglep leblep taw ane chalewa mai basana tane leblep tinde mewa leblep mewa tinde nam chirite nes chidangi ta diro chidangi ta ip miki yuldo sungjar gyurwa dela ipki wangne ipki gone ewa chena sa ipki gone samlo tangna ane ta tinde dan tinde yes le yakang do shuwa na shinchine tinde yes la ke jarido
We're currently discussing the first of the 5 sense objects, which is visible form, right? And we said that we can divide that into color forms and shape forms. So what does shape forms then refer to? Shape forms are in general said to be long or short, square or round, concave or convex, fine or gross, even or uneven. There are many subdivisions such as triangular, crescent shaped, oblong, and so forth. And so when we take this, like these are the forms that are described. So long, for example, is a long piece of rope or a long thread. And short then refers to a short piece of it. Round, like a ball, and square, like a square piece of something, so with corners. And then we have here the translation concave and convex. Concave and convex actually is not the translation that I would choose according to Lamala's explanation here. It's rather high and low. So high, and these are dependent on each other. They appear as high and low only if we compare different things, right? If we take a very big mountain and then there's a small hill next to it, then the big mountain is high, whereas the small hill is lower. The same with buildings. If we have a 5-story building next to a 10-story building, the 5-story building actually appears to be low or shorter, while the 10-story building, the 10th floor building appears to be very high. If there's a two-floor high building, a 2-story building next to the 5-story building, then actually the 5-floor tall building appears to be very high. So in that sense, the idea or the identification of something being high or low really, or tall and short, really depends on comparison with another thing. fine and gross forms are then the different kinds of forms that we can find that might be smaller, more subtle, or coarse forms, like having an actual big thing like a vase. That's a coarse kind of form, coarse kinds of shape. And then even and uneven, like even would be something very smooth, like the inside of our hand, the palm of our hand. It's very even compared to anything that is more uneven, has a lot of ups and downs. So in that sense, we have these different kinds of shape forms to think about, but really these are the shapes, all the shapes that are the object of the eye faculty, what the eye faculty perceives.
Tine dila yang dodong yang ewa shimba yang ane je juksum sen na sur sumba taw sur sum yongi da chala den so kashi ngonde taw sur sum dagam sen na halam mado tine dawa gi ip taw dawa chega taw ip taw ra dawa koko rang mare dawa tane sewa juni juksum tindegi dawa ibtawarwa dagam ane jongmo sena ane nanar yong o tindesini mangbo ewa tinde yuwares.
There are many subdivisions such as triangular, crescent-shaped, oblonged, and so forth. So there are many subdivisions of these shape forms, of these shapes. For example, something being triangular, having 3 corners, having 3 tips. Crescent-shaped refers to the shape that the moon would take or takes at maybe the 12th or 13th of the lunar calendar, of the lunar month. So the 12th or 13th day of the moon month, when it's not completely round, but a little bit shaped. And so on, then there's oblonged and so forth. So there are many different kind of shapes that can be perceived, shape forms.
네 입당 카도 데다 상보 녜바 바르마 숨도 두오스 단다 페나 미기 숭자르 주르와데라 입기 고네 체나 단다 야강라 슈심바 덴조레 데네 카도기 고네 미기 숭자르 주르와데 카도 고네 에와 체나 아네 단다 야강라 데 자위 카도 당 연락이 카도 근데 에와 체조 능시데 아니 다다 도도양 다디 샤슈르와 단다디 차차르와도 당 로와도 당 도과도 데 넘버 이제데 페나 뒤츠 네가비고네 에와 체와라와 단다디 굴롱 데 레가데 마제문라 굴롱 데 삼로 코디가 레가 디치고스네 통에게 뒤츠 디기 갑라데네 지기여와 하고기 통교여레 리기여레 다지 속수롱과 니도 차기여레 뒤갑라 디치네 디 왕도 체와 당양 미기 왕보라다 낭출기고네 체와데 펜나 반낭 꺄생와세 몬바르카여수 어텐조 더와 어텐조 던조라 양 덴데고네 체여수네 간데고네 슈나 상보당 녜바당 바르마 숨도안 체여스 상보세나 이도홍와 녜바세나 예도명와 바르마세나 당뇽도 페나 입 상와세나 입이고네 체비갑라 페나 입데 야고 셰게나 예동와 주는 입 상보 입데 독자도 셰게나 입 녜바 안에 입 상에 가마세나 입 바르마 penna khato gi gone ewa tela karpo chonda karpo do penna yi do wa chungna khato sangbo chi yang yi do mangwa do khato do yesona dinana yang ngemba chi tene yi do wa ta mayong ba kaya mena yang parma chi 당는 신게 강당 강군의 미기 송절 주루와 지와 대도 탐제라 양 상의 바르마 숨도 양 뉘대여레스 상보직 당님 바지다 바르마 숨 기능라 도
Then the next line reads, these shapes and colors can be classed as attractive, repulsive, or neutral. So these shapes are what we have just discussed, the different kinds of shapes, shape forms. And the colors are what we have seen yesterday with the primary colors and then the secondary colors and also spatial form, which is a presentation in light of what is perceived or how something is perceived by the eye faculty. And so like the empty space, it's a way that is perceived, not talking about the space itself, but how we perceive it. Then perceptible forms that speak more about the time frame of how it is perceived. So when that we perceive when we develop the motivation to engage in such action. So all of these kinds of colors, as well as the shapes, or these kinds of color forms, as well as the shape forms, then can be classified into attractive, repulsive, or neutral. So whatever is pleasing to our mind is called attractive. What is not pleasing, what we develop an aversion towards, is repulsive. And then there are other things that are neutral. So it depends on how we relate to these appearances to class them as attractive, repulsive, or neutral. So for example, if there is a form that is very pleasing to behold to us, then we would think of that as an attractive, as a good form. The Tibetan doesn't have as much of as a note from the translator here. Attractive is probably a little bit strong, like it's a good form, a bad form, or neutral, in the sense that they are attractive, repulsive, or neutral in the way that we perceive them. So for example, when we see a form that we like, that is very pleasing to us, that would be an attractive or a good form. Or the same with a color, if we like something that is white, then the color shape of white is pleasing to us, and that would be a good or an attractive color shape. While another color that is not pleasing to us, that we don't want to look at, would then be repulsive or bad color in our perception. So in this way, we can summarize all colors, or if we don't have a particular feeling of liking or disliking a color or shape, then those are neutral. So in this way, any color form or shape form fall into the categories of attractive, repulsive, or neutral.
So tene don ngai nangne ane tra dine nipa tra nawi yulte sna ane nawi nashi gi yuldu jowa de tra itsini re nemchoke kwede yulde de la simbi jungwi gyule jungwa simjingi ngadang segolo ge tra taus ane tra de la yang ewa shane dona 강사기 시규 강사기 셈 강사기 초로하게 심바 다든데 보니 에와 체나 디다고 심발의 중미 강사기 시규 강사기 초로와 임바 딘데기 유레 중의 임바데 셈쟁기 ngaks ngazo kecha shejo denzo daw pena lakpagi inde sekul tokyo daw ro o denzo de simbale 중이 tas masim sena sheju gi masim chorwa gi masim sem gi masim sem gi chebale 중화 많이 받아 마심발에 중위 중화지기 귤에 중임바데 아니 추다 추룽 세네갈라 추장보 춤보든 조리갈라 데 셈게 처로하기 심조한 말에 네딘조 셈게 제조라고 처로하다고 되네가 말아 데인데가 딘조 당 룽기자 싱동보딘조 파추 툭니자 어디다고 지네 심발의 중위자다 마심발의 중위자 신데 유레스 자데라
The second of the five objects, the five sense objects, is then sound. And that is defined as sounds are defined as the sense objects of the ear. So sounds are the sense objects of the ear. There are different kinds, sounds that originate from conscious elemental causes, such as the voice of a sentient being or a finger snap, sounds that originate from unconscious elemental causes, such as the sounds of a river, the wind, and so forth. So there are different categories of sound that we can identify. One kind are the sounds that are created by something that is sentient. So, like a person, something that has a mind stream, that has feelings, has a consciousness, and when something like that, so a person or any sentient being creates a sound, then that is the sound that originates from conscious elemental causes. And that refers to human speech, for example, when we utter words, or sounds that we create physically, like a finger snap. Then there are also the sounds that originate from unconscious elemental causes. So that means from objects that do not have feelings, that do not have a mind stream or consciousness. So for example, the sounds that are created by water, if there's a big river, the sound that the running water makes, the flowing river makes, is a sound created by an unconscious element. Or the sound of wind, or the sound that two inanimate trees or wood, pieces of wood would make, then that hit each other. So two trees would hit into each other because of wind. That would be also a sound caused by inanimate things.
니가래 중와 nga 동be 자다 was kiu shejuge da de pena choba suri kala nga 동나 de 동게 미데 pena sheju sem chorwa dindegi chungjoji ge chezul chorwa jige wa dang 동사게 양 nga데 양 shejuge simba maimba da konzo ni rubni chungge wa ge chala ni가래 중we 동we cha nga 동wa da was pena chamnye 동jo da pena lingbu pyo da 다 된저 신발 지 미기 동에게 직망 보전데 탐제라도와 니가리 좀 와스 니가 쓰리가라가 간다량 기우기 셰주 초로암 셈기 심바당 아니 미코롱당 시주암 셈 초로하기 맞음바데 배나 나다오 어디로 니가래 중마스
Sounds that originate from both consciousness and conscious and unconscious elements, such as beating a drum. So there are also sounds that come into existence or that resound because of both conscious and unconscious causes. So there would be, for example, a person and an inanimate object that by working together, coming together, then create sounds. For example, when a person with an intention, with feelings, with a consciousness, beats a drum during a puja, the drum is an inanimate object, but that doesn't have feeling, that doesn't have an intention, a consciousness, and so on. But the coming together of the inanimate object and the person who actively beats the drum then creates a sound, the drum beat. And that then is a sound that is created by both of these together, both conscious and unconscious elements.
양 딘데레데 시주기 신당 마심비고니 에와 체나 다 차들라고 딘데스여레스 양데 제바 된 제바보 직당 내가 지긴 직당 미치긴 딘데시기 돈다 주긴당 돈다 미주기 딘데긴 고네 개체시나 베나 심진도 뜸바 된 제바 신직당 심진도 미련바 된 저바를 미제바스네 딘데 니유스 더 심진도 뜸바스 지 심진도 뜸바스네 심진기 자임바 라와 베나 심진기 자임바 베나 가랑소 단다 계제시 대화데 디 심진기 자레 심진도 뜸바레 디 자데 되네 된 저바를 제바스 된 저바를 제바스 데가다 베나 된다지 외비 계제지 랍게 여러와 되게 베나 랑도르게 콜라 계자 인데 아니 랑도르게 콜라 다트로 바르 제바스 오딘데스네 내가 지긴 게 계자 직당 양 심진도 미디엄바 된 저바르 미제바스 심진도 미드바스나 양 베나 드라카시 드라카시 심진게 레 중화 마임바 심진도 미디엄바스 아니 랑도르게 콜라 된다 양 미제바스 미제바 베나 가르스나 추기다 룽기다 아니 디다오게 자강다 강이바 된저와 행동 된저 툭 행동 동본이 툭나 되네 잘lep견다오 된저양 된저와 다 내가 제 미제당 된다 된메던 된데기 고네양 자들라 된데스네 에와 요레스
What we have just seen is this division into animate and inanimate causes for the sound to arise. Another way of classifying then the different sounds is regarding whether they convey meaning or not, whether they accomplish a certain meaning or benefit or not. So when an animate object, so a sentient being, speaks, for example, then this refers to animate sounds that express meaning. There's meaning conveyed by the sounds that are made by the sentient beings. For example, a person who conveys us a meaning, teaches what is to be adopted and what is to be rejected, or teaches the correct usage of grammar. These kinds of things are aspects of human speech, which would be the expression of meaning by an animate sounds, by sounds created by sentient beings, compared to inanimate sounds that don't express meaning. So something that is not sentient then does not convey a particular meaning, does not teach what is to be adopted and what is to be taken up, and does not use or teach grammar. So the sounds that are made by inanimate objects, like trees hitting together or by wind and water, those are the second category here.
Yang dradela yang ane dadang tanya taksulgi gune yang ewa chena yang dinda yores pena den jeje la jigdenbe tanya serwa tanya taksultang pena ani phakbe tanya taksul sogi khepana yang yores langdoruki kecha denjo lawar chebe chedula langdoruki den denjo jobare chela jigden phalba ngarangjo pena jigden palba jigden la yorwa ngana zo da jigden sozo kyo jigden den zo la yang jigden be bena kawa bumba chokje la so ba den ge tanye ji da sha yorwa o den de sene jigden be ge tanye da gwe chulji dang yang de da wo den da de jobar che ba la lang dru ge che de jobar che ba la phakbe tanye da ba phakba 살라네 배 장주선 반남 양 명당샤교 탐을 위게 자마이 바양 계차 또 박비 계차 배나 덴바시오 덴바시네 동알 덴바 군중 덴바 고베 덴바 람게 덴바오 어디로 배나 남타르 고숨 라이로 배나 파르도 침바 두 파르도 침바 주 안에 배나 두제 탐제니 메타바오 라이로 어딘데기 다단 타니기 고네 체나 양 다델라 어딘데스네 지딘비기 타니에 따와 까와 분바 라소바 당 지딘 팔베케 자직 당양 이제 파바 남기 덴데스네 타니에 땅샤바 다당 타니에 어딘데스네 다딱술기 고네 타니에 에와 체나 양 덴데스 요레스 송레.
And there's another way of classifying sounds, and that is then in terms of who and how certain terms are being used or applied. And here the sentence reads, sound spoken by a mundane person or by a noble person. So who speaks certain kinds of things? Is it something mundane, or is it something that is spoken by a noble person? When ordinary people speak, then they use terminology and topics like applying names to different things, a pillar or a vase. Those words, those terms are sounds that express meaning that is expressed by mundane people, ordinary people. So the terms are used in everyday life. But then there are other sounds that also express meaning, but they're expressed by noble beings, by the bodhisattvas that abide on the 10 bhumis and so on. And they express according meaning, like talking about the Four Noble Truths and applying the terminology of the Four Noble Truths, saying there's a truth of suffering, the truth of origination, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path. They also speak about presentations, use terminology like they like sounds that are spoken by those on the 10 bhumis are then also those that convey the meaning of the 6 paramitas or the 10 paramitas, the 3 doors of hagiographies, of stories of liberation, and so on. So these are then all the sounds that can be spoken by noble persons. And so we have just ordinary talk, ordinary meaning, and then this meaning that is beyond in this world, leading beyond this world, the things that are uttered and thought about or used by noble beings.
Yang 제 다델라 베나 초르와 텐술기 군에 에와 요레 렌숭아레 초르와 나란주고 데 다델라 병데 칼라 초르와 제 렙당기 군에 삼노당나 지데 에와 요센 숭아레 간에 인선은 대다라 년 민년 바르미 에와 남소스 다 초르와 텐술 년선은 베나 초르와 이동와 텐켄 서로와 이동과 켈루킹게 자된졸라 잔님보스 베나 갸링기 자다오 베나 링부게 자다오 베나 잠닝게 자다오 오 딘데스네 요레스 양 서로와 아니 마키부 제용킹게 딘데기 자 명라 서로와 명님바스 따케샤 독자 된조라 케샤 독자 된조라와 케샤 독자 된조 랍송나 아노조 서로와 마키부 레게 오 딘데스요스 그냥 지당기 년보다 만년보라다 낭매지에게 다든데 요초기로와 자가시에다 갑가양 추다들 년보래 나라기 들어와 양 갑가양 샤데가라 추다 땅뇽다고 해야 나기 들어와 딱 가야나 추다다고 땅 안에 딱 이제 이동과 다 마음과 가양 맞게 자다고 지든데 용거라 파르메타다울라 다 딘데스네 샤에도 데 라두사마 초르와 텐술기 고네 양 년민년 파르메타스네 다 잘라 에와 딘데스네 요레스 송네 남소 에와 남소.
Sounds can also be divided into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So this division then depends on how we feel about the sounds that were created, the feeling that these sounds bring up in us. And there are sounds that are pleasant, that we like to hear, that are just something really delightful. For example, the sounds that are made by different musical instruments, like the yelling, the flute, or the different kinds of jamyen, the guitars. And so those kinds of sounds that are created by the musical instruments are something that we like, that are pleasant, that are enjoyable. So they would fall into the category of pleasant sounds. Then there are other things we don't like to hear that are very unpleasant to listen to. If someone speaks very foully, when someone speaks really a lot of bad things, then we don't like to listen to that. We don't like to hear it. It's very unpleasant. So that would be then an unpleasant sound because it brings about a very unfavorable feeling in us. We don't like it. And then there are some sounds that are just neutral. For example, like neutral meaning that we don't really bother about them. We don't feel good or bad about them. We don't care. For some people, listening to the sound of water is something pleasant, but for others, or other sounds of water are probably neutral. Just the sound of water flowing. So there's just certain sounds that we don't have any particular reaction to, so they're neutral.
나서 되네 가상 슈와 나신레 최응원바디기 당보 자와 직샤 아는 딜라 에와 양 에와스네 어디네 스토기요레스네 가상 슈와 나신지니 따데네스네 에와라 도기요레 따디페 야고레 에와든조 야보시에나가조 최응원바디 조 시랍 게 라바스 대한조 시랍 펠기랭조라 베나 데링 삼로다나조 자델라 베나 자델라 기우 초로하게 셈비게 자당 기우 초로하게 마슴비 자라긴도 로와 아니 이제 다단 타냐 딱송기고네 자 예와다로와 베나 초로와 덴줄기고네 예와선데 아주 된다 하고이도 안데 시랍 펠기로와 된저 야고레스 단데 데 진저래 다 ngomba shirap zo tembas ne shirap ilabas de ne shirap pelegi lega chigure de ewa mangbo shegi dos ne yang tindesne samye mare ewa shena de ne ewa de zo hago gurta tiring de zo de da 되는 거 있는 자지 자이 에와 양 가시에 시도스 되네 되는 거 있는 수대 조사래다 안에 가상 편제라 왕보 된적이 제례도 언디네 조사래다네 안에 또 때에 풍부가 안에 당보 속이 풍부되게 제시기래 아니 속이 풍부 속대라 양 유속당 제속스는 니 유속대 아니 시 제속 죽지스 다단다 제속 죽지기 남라 되는 거 있는 자들을 냅대라와 어디래는 디 엔체데라 되네 풍부가 안에 당보 속이 풍부고라래 단다 아니 데 풍부 대양 야강네 데 내주나네 다 당보들러와 단단하죠 단다 다 가상 편제라 내주 시에사래 내주나네 다 풍부라 lep대래 풍부라 풍부가 나네 장 속이 풍부 나 속이 풍부 될라 양 되니 에와 도치네 된데 lep대래스
As I told you before, this is the style of the Abhidhamma. The Abhidhamma texts, they classify things, and then they classify the classified, or they break it down into more and more detailed elements. So that's the way that the Abhidhamma explains any kind of topic, going from having a topic and breaking it down in its different kinds, then breaking it further down. And that's something that is important and very good if we know. Like, all these classifications are important for us to know. It is said that studying the Abhidhamma leads to an increase in wisdom. It's a training in wisdom if we study the Abhidhamma. So today we spoke about sound. Like, the last topic we covered was sound, and it's good to know that there are these different kinds of sounds, that we think about what causes sounds, that there are sounds that are created by sentient beings, and then there are sounds that are created by non-sentient things. Just to become clear that this exists, that there are these differences, we classify them and we become aware of these different kinds of things. So we develop more sensitivity, or we come to know more of these phenomena. And so in this way, our knowledge, our discriminative knowledge, our discriminative wisdom increases. That's the function of the Abhidhamma and all these categories. And we can think of it in this way. Today we covered sound, and we covered the last pieces and the last lines of the topic of form, visible form. These are categories within the sense objects. And we already covered the sense faculties and their functions, what they do. Here we have and all of that belongs to the category of the form aggregate. The form aggregate, again, is a part of the 5 aggregates, which is one of the fields that we study for learnedness. So this is one of the 10 topics of learnedness. So to become learned, to become knowledgeable, and to develop discriminative wisdom of the 10 topics of knowledge, then leads to looking at each of these 10. What are the 10 topics The first one of them are the aggregates. How do we study the aggregates? By looking at the 5 aggregates within which we have reached the first one, form. And then we further divided form, the aggregates of form, into the 4 causal and 11 resultant forms. And within that, we reached the sense objects, especially the sense object of sound now, which we have completed just now. So this is the way that by classifying and further classifying things, we come to an understanding of more and more subtle topics. So that's the way that this works. That's the way of the Abhidhamma.
Yes. Okay,
I will stop here for today, and we will recite the dedication. In your booklet, it's let me check. Where are the dedications? Page 33 to 35.
Ngoen chambal pawen chidara kemba dang kundo sangbo de yang de shen de da kunjen je so da lo jen ke wan de da tam je ram do ngo do zum she ben yang wa ye tam je je ngo wa gang la chong do nga ban de Nāngi kīvī tsāngvā āndī guñ jāng sāngbō chū jīn rābdō ngō vārā jē sūnām dī yé tam jē sī pā yé tōp nē nyē chā nām pām jē nī jē gā nāng chē pā rā chō pā yé sī bēn tsō lē rō wā Drolwa sho enkewa diyen jiwon kum sunam yeshe chozo ne sunam yeshe le jongwan tamba kunye tobara sho lo chu sun drowara chinje lamdo son chu lamdo drowara chin lamdo so lam chulwa selwara chin Labdo so chulba ye she so sharwar chinge labdo so.
For attendance, please tell me your favorite color.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, a color, as it's a Abhidhammic color, Mark.
Tuchana.
Thank you.
Tuchana.
Tuchana.
Hello, Inkala.
Yes.
I have a small question. I think it's better to ask you rather than ask Lopan and consume the time of the whole class.
Sure.
Regarding this division of this spatial form and perceptible form, where does this fit under? Is it under the color forms, or is it just under visible forms? Because in the book it says the visual forms can be classified into two: color and the shape. And there's also another division: spatial form and perceptible form. And where does this fit into exactly?
Yeah, that's what he said yesterday. It is placed within the color forms.
Yeah.
It's not really a color. Even sunny and so on are not really colors, but they are color forms. And so because we have this twofold category into color forms and shape forms, it somehow counts into color forms.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And also, yeah, regarding this pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral thing, right? I think I remember from our last semester Modern Devia class, it was more part of a sense consciousness that, yeah, like makes the division of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. The sense object and the sense sense faculties are just something that doesn't involve any analysis of, yeah, like conscious decision.
Yes.
So I'm just, yeah.
But it's about what feeling it creates, what kind of impression it creates for us. So the way that this was explained today is like you categorize the objects as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral based on what kind of reaction you get from it. So it's not the object itself that is pleasant, but the feeling that it eventually creates when it's perceived. And that's the result, the feeling about it, whether it's experienced as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, that's not in the object itself. That's what the result, the experience result.
That's the second aggregate, right? A sensation, or more towards third aggregate, perception.
Yeah.
So this object itself is not pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral.
No, but we can categorize them because they're the cause for a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feelings. We categorize this way.
Okay, so in terms of causal, okay, it has a causal relation. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so
You're
much. Take
You're
care.
welcome.
Bye.
You too. It's good to hear you.
Yeah.
Hi, Inkala.
Hi, Kapil.
So yesterday I tried to find the translations, but it was really, really difficult. I couldn't find it, so I asked one Lama Lopenla, and then he was saying like, "Oh, these are all big prayers. Like you can't find it on internet." So and then I asked Lama Lopen Rupgyutinder himself, and I think he ended up changing the whole prayers to.
That's
Yeah. I asked him like, we have the prayer, but we need the translation. So if you can tell me like who wrote those prayers and all, then he was like, no, I don't know.
Yes. We had the same thing in the summer. The I was reciting verses and I looked them up, and he
was really
like I managed to find some of them, and I asked a Campo, and he could tell me all of the verses, but he could not tell me where they're coming from. So, yeah. So yeah.
I sent one to one Lupinla, and Lupinla looked at it and he was like, I don't know this one. And I sent another one. He was like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to humiliate me or what? So,
yeah, I think now that he changed it, that he doesn't recite them anymore, it's okay. But some of them I actually found in the chant book. So
I found three of them. The Jumipam one, and then the Shakyamuni supplication, and then the last one, Ugin Uginu Chansam.
Yeah.
Beside that, it's like no chance.
Okay, we could just write those down for people who are interested, and then probably write a transliteration for those that we don't know. I don't have time.
Those are all done.
To translate them.
Parla lot already. It's done.
Okay, perfect.
That's all.
Thank you so much.
Okay. You are welcome.
Okay. Bye.
See you tomorrow. Bye.
See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. It's so hard to turn off the computer and go to work.
Yes. Yes. I'm sorry, I can't study full time.
Sorry. Okay, so see you
Okay.
tomorrow.
See you
Bye.
tomorrow. Bye.